You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Lifeline, offering a holistic wellness approach focused on supporting American law enforcement, promoting resilience, safety, and survivability.
Welcome back to another special episode of Lifeline, part of the Precinct 444 podcast network at the National Law Enforcement Museum. I'm Matt Garcia, the Officer Safety and Wellness Program Manager and host for today's episode. I'm here today with Supervisory Special Agent John Skillestad of the FBI's Office of Partner Engagement and Violence Reduction Unit. Today, we're going to look at the origins of active shooter incidents and changes in law enforcement response and training since Columbine in 1999. We'll discuss what has worked well, where some incidents fell short, and how attention to officer wellness has evolved over the years. We will also explore some of the FBI's initiatives and resources involving victim services and public awareness. John joins us today because of his extensive knowledge in the field of active shooters. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much.
John, how long have you been with the FBI?
I've been a special agent with the FBI for a little over 33 and a half years.
And what brought you into this current field of study that you're now focused in, and especially when it comes to active shooters and the overall response over the last 2 decades?
My previous assignment was in the Dallas field office, where I worked violent crime matters and threats to life situations leading to active shooter cases. I was one of the behavioral analysis coordinators in Dallas and received significant training related to active shooters. And as my career progressed, I was doing some of these research and investigations at the local field office level, and an opportunity presented itself where I felt that I could help out more on a national level, and position became available here at headquarters, and I was fortunate enough to be selected to participate in this unit.
And when you say Dallas, you're referring back to the shooting where we lost 5 officers.
Yes, sir. That was obviously one of the experiences that I was a part of. As a matter of fact, I was one of our crisis management coordinators at the time, and as the shooting occurred, I was actually at home and received a call from my supervisor, and he was like, "Hey, you're watching the news?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Are you getting called out?" And less than 30 seconds later, I got the call and ended up deploying down to our field office, initially to our command post that we had operational down there, and then moved to the forward command post at Dallas City Hall at that point.
Between Columbine and Dallas, a lot has evolved, a lot's changed, our response has changed. Can you take us back to 1999, back to Columbine, and really what started the shift in law enforcement response? Because Columbine wasn't the first shooting, the first active shooter that we had within this country, but it really is the incident that brought attention to how law enforcement responds. And so much has evolved out of that over the years with the way that we respond and the way that we address all of the various components that go with it, from how we help officers, from how we support families, how we deal with the media. But can you take us back to 1999 and the early days that started off this shift?
Yeah, I believe there were several factors that came into play with Columbine. By that point in time, law enforcement had evolved into the use of special weapons and tactics teams that came to being after the shooting at the University of Texas in Austin at the Clock Tower shooting in 1966, which was the advent of SWAT teams. And, you know, law enforcement in the country then went under that model of using SWAT teams for more dangerous, dynamic type situations. But like you mentioned, Columbine was just a phenomenon that occurred. You know, as one of the things is that cable news was prevalent at that time. So it was the 24-hour news cycle, and the shooting really played out nationally in the media. And the response at the time was that, hey, and this was the tactics of law enforcement all around the country was, hey, we're going to get our SWAT teams ready, deploy them out to that location. But in the meantime, regular street officers did not have that advanced tactical training to understand that this was a dynamic situation where law enforcement needed to bond to try and neutralize those shooters as quickly as possible. And obviously, the delays in getting into the building potentially led to additional casualties. So after Columbine, there was a new focus on law enforcement response, specifically by several law enforcement officers in Texas, and in partnership with Texas State University, developed the ALERT program. And ALERT stands for Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training, which is now being utilized by a large number of law enforcement agencies throughout the country.
I was on the website for the FBI, Active Shooter Safety Resources, and there's a video in the aftermath when the shooting stops and recovery begins. And to your point, it mentions, you know, those first 5 to 10 minutes are so critical. It's within those first 5 and 10 minutes that decisions are made that have the potential to affect the outcome of the overall scenario. And so that response and that change in response, where we went from holding the perimeter until SWAT arrived. They were better equipped with body armor, better equipped with firepower to go into the active shooter scenario. But we have now recognized how important it is to make those early decisions. We're sending teams in as soon as they start arriving on scene. How did that all come about? That training, you saw it in Dallas. You saw how we went from 1999. Now, with the Dallas shooting that you mentioned, because you had personal experience of being at the in the city at the time, what changed for law enforcement?
Well, a number of things changed. You know, regular street officers were now being trained to enter the fray immediately upon arrival to a location where a shooting was occurring. And, you know, the initial response back then after Columbine was first officer goes in, basically no matter what. And over time, that has somewhat been refined because, yeah, we need officers to go in as quickly as possible, but maybe if we wait another 10, 15 seconds, there's going to be additional resources, additional officers arriving. And it may not be from your jurisdiction. It may be sheriff's officers, or it could be federal law enforcement, because when the word gets out that there's a shooting, you're getting a response from numerous agencies. And the idea of the ALERT training was to create that baseline of training, that advanced tactics, so that if you're partnered up with someone from another jurisdiction, you would understand the tactics and would be able to work as a team moving forward. Obviously, in the Dallas situation was a little bit different. That was at the end of a peaceful protest that was occurring in the city. So there were a number of officers already present at the scene, and the gunman ended up surprising those officers. He was targeting those officers as opposed to innocent civilians, and the officers responded as best they could under some very dramatic situations.
You mentioned the alert training, which is the FBI's Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Program. But, you brought up a good point that in these instances, you've got so many agencies responding, and they're coming from different backgrounds, different training. And so the program like Alert, and if you could tell us more about the Alert training, how you can access it, and how, because if I understand correctly from an earlier conversation we had, you're increasing the number of agencies that are being trained through the Alert system, which now means that you're sharing best practices out there with agencies from across the country. They're getting standardized training. So now the response, there's a greater chance that responding agencies have been trained really to the same standards. And so that breaks down some of the miscommunication that happens in these very chaotic scenes. But you can tell us a bit more about the Alert training, how agencies can access that.
So the Alert training was developed, like I had mentioned before, after Columbine, and yet that was more on a local level through Texas State University. And the FBI, we really did not get into the active shooter game until after the tragedy at Sandy Hook. And once that occurred, we, the FBI, received authority to assist and work in the active shooter world through the Investigative Assistance to Violent Crimes Act of 2012. An active shooter incident is not a federal crime. These are generally local crimes unless they occur on federal property. And so the local jurisdiction is the primary investigative agency. Through this Investigative Assistance to Violent Crimes Act, the Attorney General has given the FBI the authority to assist and provide resources to those local agencies. One of the things that we did after getting that authority was to understand advanced training and advanced tactics, and research was conducted as to, hey, what would be the best program to work with, and a number of studies were done and research related to these different organizations that were putting this training on, and we felt that the Alert program provided the type of training that we believed would best benefit local law enforcement. So we ended up partnering with Texas State University. We continue that relationship today, where we provide resources to them, funding to them, and allow for us to receive training as well as certifying instructors. So there are both local instructors as well as FBI instructors throughout the country that allows for that cross training from local to state and federal agency partnerships. And as a result of our relationship, all of this training is free to those officers throughout the country. We actually even do training internationally related to this. It's really more of a request from those departments saying, we'd like to receive that training, and then we coordinate with Texas State to set that training up for them.
We've covered how changes to the response and within those first few minutes are so critical. and officers are engaging the suspect immediately upon arrival. They're sort of taking the fight directly to the subject, and they're not waiting. What have you seen within our response where we may have fallen short, where law enforcement's response has fallen short? There's always areas for improvement. You're diving into this and studying this at a nationwide level. Where can we improve?
Well, I think, you can look at different incidents and the response and even in the ones that are more successful. What I mean by that is you're able to neutralize that shooter quicker. There's always lessons learned where we can improve even on those situations. But the idea is, and we had talked about this a little bit before, by having that training, by receiving that training, your body, your mind begins to understand and feel a little bit more comfortable as far as, okay, I understand this is very dangerous, but this is my training, this is my level of training, and I know how to respond to it. And it's putting that physical and mental pictures together so that you can effectively respond to those situations. We talked about, or at least you mentioned before, about the increase in communication. A lot of times there's a failure in communication, and it may not necessarily be individual communication. It could be failure of communication as a result of equipment failures. And so I don't want to, say that one agency performed greater than another, because the circumstances are always different. And you've got to understand that there are challenges facing each and every one of these agencies that respond. And, some may not perform as well as we like because of maybe they've never trained that type of challenge. Maybe the fact that the radio system goes out, hey, we didn't train having runners providing messages back and forth. Maybe the fact that telephone or cell phone communication goes down. A lot of those things are those what ifs that, in the basic level 1 training of alert really only touches on and really doesn't go into in-depth practice just because of time constraints. But again, the more we learn, the more we study, the more that we can interject into those situations, that training of saying, okay, now we've got this situation where communication has failed, or for whatever reason, the assailant or the shooter has put up additional challenges to our response. What are we going to do? Or do we have the ability to pivot from one situation to another? And it may be something that we have not necessarily trained, but it may be part of the mindset of those responding officers to think on their feet that, hey, I've got to keep an open mind while I'm still focused on trying to locate that shooter and neutralize the shooter as quickly as possible.
There's so many departments out there that have been able to, after they clear certain legal hurdles and after some time has passed, where they can really get into reviewing their own response. But when they put out those after actions that become public, there's so much information in there, and I think so officers from around the country are pulling that up and looking at it. You've got commanders, you've got law enforcement executives that are looking at that information. It's so valuable to share that. You and I had a conversation earlier, and we were talking about the impact on officers that are responding. We know within law enforcement that may be one particular day, but the job itself is going to continue. It's going to go on. And so the impact, the emotional impact on officers is going to stay with them in a positive or a negative way for the course of their career. And it's so important to deal with these things effectively. Remember, as I was talking with you earlier, and you had mentioned the alert and had talked to me about the alert program. I think from looking at it from a law enforcement executive standpoint, when you can provide that type of training to your officers and empower them before it happens, because looking at the stats just over the last couple of years, in 2020, you had 19 states that saw an active shooter incident. And then in 21, it went up to 30. And in 2022, you had 25 states plus DC that saw active shooters. So we can expect that at some point a state is going to have an active shooter, just where within that state. And chiefs, sheriffs can prepare their officers both for the operational response, but then there's the dealing with the emotional impact as well, and making sure that those officers are able to continue on with the job, and that the incident itself, the learning points from it carry on for the rest of their career. And part of that is teaching officers where to go, how to seek help when the impact from the shooting itself seems to be hanging on, and it's tough to sort of move through that. So, looking at the resources that the FBI has to help, and I know it falls under with the victim resources. Putting those things in place sometimes relieves the stress from officers in addition to what they're already dealing with. And one of the things that struck me is so critical with the assistance from the FBI is during those scenes, you're going to get hit with the media. And that's incredibly stressful, especially for an agency that's never dealt with that. And you offer assistance with media, dealing with media in these really high profile shootings. And also, which I found interesting, and I'll tell you why, help with the evidence. Because I do remember after Sandy Hook, seeing our own troopers having to return items back to the family. And at the time, it was just maybe one or two people that were sort of handling that in the immediate aftermath. But you provide assistance for that, which is huge for officers at the scene, because they've got so many other things that they're going to have to deal with. If you could tell us a bit about that program and the resources you offer.
Yeah, so when one of these incidents occur, and one that comes to mind is the Route 91 Harvest Festival in Las Vegas. After that shooting occurred, it was a very large crime scene. People abandon a lot of their belongings right there at the concert venue. And one of the things that we the FBI did, our evidence response teams did, was gather all that clothing items, whatever it may be, that people left behind. And as it turns out, all of that was cataloged, and those who had gone to the concert were directed to a site where they could try and identify, hey, this item belongs to me. Yes, I'd like it returned. And so we would arrange for that to happen. Now, for victims' families, there are personal effects that families would want, or at least we are offering them to them. And, many of them had biological materials. All of those were cleaned and returned in a respectful manner to those individuals. And it's a very emotional type situation for those people, whether they, were families of victims or even just the people who attended the concert. These have lasting memories for them, and you want to do it in a respectful manner. And our victim services division does an incredible job in reaching out to those individuals and understanding that, this is the incident of itself was a very traumatizing, horrifying event, and yet reuniting them with those personal effects can have that same impact on those individuals. And so, you've got to be respectful for them, respectful for that process, and understand that there could be those situations where it greatly affects the people who are on the receiving end of that. So the Victim Services Division just does an incredible job. The folks there are dedicated to their job and understand that, their actions really impact how people move forward. And, depending on who the individual is, they struggle, whether it's first responders or witnesses or family members. They can struggle to make sense of these situations. Why does this occur? And why did it have to impact me or my family member, and can have some long lasting effects on those individuals.
The benefit of having a team come in to process all of that is you can't even put a value on that. So many departments, just because of resources as to what's available or lack of available resources, that task falls to the very officers that were part of the initial response. And so that trauma just continues because now you have the initial response. Now you're handling physical evidence. And then you're going to have to bring it back or be there to reunite it with survivors and family members. And that trauma, so it doesn't stop for the officers through that. They don't get a break. And you mentioned how the team comes in. That degree of separation is huge. You can't put a value onto that because it allows the responding officers to remove themselves from that initial response. Once the threat is terminated, it's over. They get to move out of that scenario if possible. And having a team come in to oversee that and take care of that, you allow healing to begin on the other end because you've got competent professionals who are coming in. You know what you're doing. You know the value of handling everything with dignity, reuniting everything with family members, and in such a way that it's going to be respectful. Because when you do that, that's going to impact the family as well. And it done incorrectly, we've seen, unfortunately, what happens when care isn't taken. And then families have a very negative outlook on the police department. And they're all within the same community. So it's a win-win all around. The community is thankful for the manner in which it was handled. Officers get a break from that, if possible. There's going to be so many other things that they're responsible for. And then you have a competent team coming in that is going to oversee that and ensure that everything gets back to where they need to. So I think that's a great benefit of the program that could be overlooked as not being so important, whereas actually quite the opposite, because it's a benefit for everybody involved. And it helps, done correctly, it helps to bridge that relationship between the law enforcement, the responding agency, and the very community in which the shooting occurred.
I agree.
What have you seen from your work as far as the relationships between the communities and the officers? Because in the best case scenario, you have a very supportive community standing behind the police department, and it only grows stronger, that relationship. When that relationship is not there beforehand, and the response is called into question, and now there's a split between the community and law enforcement, it impacts the officers, it impacts people within the community, and it creates a further division between the two, and it makes it difficult to get things accomplished. But I want to focus on the community under the best case scenario, where you really have that coming together of both. What would you say to that?
Well, I think law enforcement gets a negative view a lot of times that, hey, it's law enforcement versus the community. And that's not our job at all. Our job is to bring the community together to protect the community. But law enforcement can't do it by themselves. They need the community's support. They need involvement from the community, because law enforcement does not have all the answers to the problems that are going on in the community. And if there's a way in which they can bridge that gap, developing those relationships with individuals, with communities, where there's a two-way street, those lines of communication allow for law enforcement to understand, have a greater understanding of what are the challenges that the citizens are having in dealing with everyday situations. And by opening those lines of communication, that dialogue, that allows for law enforcement to express to the citizens, hey, these are challenges that we're dealing with, and how can we help one another out? And that doesn't even take into account, one of these tragic situations. A lot of times what happens in these situations, like you mentioned, the community comes together. There's a great outpouring of support, not only for law enforcement, but for the victims who have been impacted. And, the community has been impacted by these things. And, it's one of the things about this country is that we do our best when we are faced with challenges and obstacles. And when we come together, and, we saw it at 9/11, how we came together after that. I mean, unifying as a nation, and this can happen in a community as well, when things are focused in on the well-being of the community itself and how we can support our first responders and other personnel who are involved in these situations. But again, you can't overlook having that relationship, developing that relationship, working on that relationship day in and day out. It can't be something you turn on 9 to 5. I mean, it's 24/7. You've got to work with the community to understand their challenges, so that hopefully the impact that you provide can be positive.
It's interesting, the changes that have happened over the years. So coming into law enforcement in 1996, when you talk community, you talk community policing, right? That was very big in the 90s, mid to late 90s. And it was working with communities, but it was typically the way that it was carried out was within small sections of a community, usually a blighted area or an area that required some more attention. You fast forward to today, then when we talk about communities, we're looking not so much just going into a particular area and working with a segment of that community, but we're talking on a broader scale. We're talking about working with the whole community. We're talking about working with different groups within the community. You're talking about with community leaders and really working with all of it, and not so much just one segment anymore. From an officer wellness standpoint, back in the 90s, you didn't talk about any of this. Then, you went to a call and then you moved on. And it really wasn't even accepted that you could pull up alongside a partner and start talking. You kind of just kept it in. With the evolution of attention to officer wellness and the effects of PTSD, the effects of trauma over the course of a career, not necessarily related to just one specific incident, but over the course of a career, I think to some level too, you're seeing some buy-in from the community, and the community is starting to understand that as well. And in some communities, you do see them rallying around the police department and showing their support, which is beneficial for the officers involved. It's also, and we had talked about this, sometimes the balance is out of whack, and in response to some of these shootings that have happened, and especially in smaller communities, the community will rally around everyone, and there will be fundraisers and drives and all of these special events, and everything has to be overseen by the police department, whether it be for traffic control or whether it be for pedestrian control. And so they don't get a break. The officers don't get a break. And as you're talking about community, I think it's important, especially for other agencies that may be listening to this today, that have been neighbors to a community that's had a shooting. Being able to come in and relieve those officers of some of those details, some of that post-incident, the events, and all of the activities that take place afterwards. Being able to come in and relieve those officers, give them a break so that they're not just working their shift and then going over the traffic detail or being present for, say, a 5K run. That's incredibly helpful, right? And it doesn't have to go on forever, but it gives those officers within that community a chance to separate for a bit. And so I would just ask any agency out there, those are things that are so critical to helping officers as they sort of recover and move beyond the incident, because the job is going to continue from one day to the next.
Yeah, Matt, with the Dallas police shooting, that's exactly what happened. As you can imagine, with the number of officers who were killed in that situation, the effect that it had across the entire department. And as you can imagine, once the officers are killed, then there's certain protocol that the department follows as far as investigation, as far as preparing for funerals and so forth. And that takes a lot of manpower just to manage that alone. And in Dallas, we saw a number of communities, outlying communities that offered up their officers to provide patrol, to provide those services that would be greatly impacted if they weren't there. And so it was really a seamless transition there, where those other neighboring law enforcement agencies stepped up, neighboring communities, their governments helping out, just supporting the city of Dallas and the impacted agencies there. One of the things that the FBI out of Dallas, one of the things that we were able to offer to the city of Dallas was our evidence response team from the region. And, initially Dallas wanted to process all of the crime scenes because it was their personnel who were shot and killed. And they felt that they owed it to their officers to be the ones to do all of that evidence collection and so forth. Well, they were remarkable in their efforts, but one thing that you've got to understand is an active shooter incident is really just one call for service for a department. it doesn't stop the other calls for service for burglaries, aggravated assaults, um, stolen vehicles, whatever it may be. So those calls are still piling up. They're still having to send their crime scene personnel to those scenes as well. And that quickly overwhelms their resources. And you may not even be involved in the incident that occurs, but it has a lasting impact on the entire department. And so anytime there are resources from the outside agencies, whether it's local or federal, it helps galvanize not only that department, but those relationships between those departments, because sometime in the future that department may need assistance, and it makes it much easier for someone to say, hey, I'm just returning the favor here. And that's one of the things about law enforcement. It's a brotherhood, and you realize that you're fortunate to be here, and whatever you can do to make an impact to help out others is really the goal here.
It is that's so accurate. It really is this. At the end of the day, it's a family, right? And everybody looking to support one another. We had touched upon certain after a community has gone through such a critical incident, there could be feelings of you have either missed something or feelings of helplessness that you could have done or you should have done more. And those are all natural feelings, but the reality is that in many cases you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. Certain signs can be missed, but being able to empower a community after a community law enforcement as well after a shooting, and so I'm thinking of our school resource officers that have to, for school shootings, they have to go back in. And, in the wake of some of the really high profile shootings that we've seen over the years, and when you're talking about being able to empower people, because there is a healing quality to that, when you can learn from something and you can take that knowledge going forward. But what are the red flags? Some of the red flags, the indicators out there that we've learned over the years from the research that you and your team have done and been a part of, that you would share to law enforcement, whether they're hearing it from people in the community who trust them and are talking to them and sharing this information, or whether law enforcement's coming across it directly. But what are those indicators that we've learned that there could be more behind?
Well, first of all, we're probably our strongest critics of ourselves. We look at things, we realize, hey, this is the way we responded, this is how it turned out, and yet, like you mentioned, hey, we missed something. There could have been something better that we could have done. We could have done it more effectively. The idea there is, hey, the more information we have, the more intelligence that we obtain about people's behaviors, how people act, can help us in mitigating those situations. And again, it's one of those situations where you have to have that relationship with the community. The community has to feel comfortable enough, willing to report information about concerning behaviors. And, because law enforcement, we can't do things if we don't have the information available to us. We're not aware of what's going on. And we've got to be the eyes and ears, but so do the public. The public has to have confidence in law enforcement that, hey, if we give you information, we expect you to act upon it. And that's what we strive to do every day, whether it's an active shooter situation or trouble within a school or community. We want to have that information be able to gather it and then process it and determine what are the steps that need to be taken to mitigate it or neutralize that. And I think a lot of times people feel that, in a situation that could potentially end up being an active shooter situation, that, if they report information, that law enforcement is just going to go and tell the person, hey, so-and-so just told us about you. And they're fearful that repercussions could come back to them. And what we've got to try and do is allay their fears and say, hey, look, we're trying to do something to help this individual. And it may be such that it's not a law enforcement action that occurs, because a lot of times these individuals have not committed a crime as of that time, but they're needing help. A lot of times these are cries for help. And if we're able to intervene, we don't involve them in the criminal justice system. We're able to get them that assistance that they need, the help that they need, whether it's, counseling or whatever the issue may be. It may not be related to criminal behavior, but the way that they are processing things, the way that they're thinking is that, hey, this is the only way I see out of this is through harming others. They may feel that for whatever reason, someone is not giving them the attention that they need or whatever. And a lot of times folks are just wanting to talk to someone, and yet they don't have someone that they feel they're able to do that with. And we see that a lot of times where you have students who feel marginalized. They're not part of a community group, a part of an organization, and feel left out and don't have the confidence to approach someone to ask questions or start a conversation. There may be issues at home that they feel that they can't address, and they begin to spiral out of control and feel that, hey, I want to be heard. I want my voice to be heard. And the way they do that is by acting out, and can be lead to very tragic consequences.
It'd be nice to say that we've seen the end of it, but I think just the numbers over the years unfortunately show that we're sort of moving in the wrong direction. But I want to commend you and the work that you're doing. And we talked about the behavioral analysis unit, and that's a whole nother conversation that I found incredibly interesting in the work you're doing. And I'm hoping that we could maybe find time to dive into that on another episode, because there's so much there that is so pertinent to the overall discussion. And I really would love to sit down and pick your brain on that as well in the future. As far as the training that you were talking about with alert, we are seeing and looking at the statistics, and I kind of want to wrap up with this because I think it's so important. You're seeing the number of officers engaged is going up, and we're trying to keep the number actually wounded going down. So, or killed. The number killed within the last year, I believe, off the 2022 report was one officer was killed in response, and prior to that, we had 2 officers killed the year before. We're engaging. So in 22, there were 9 incidents where law enforcement actually engaged the shooters. It's actually went down from 17, which was the year before, engaging, but the number of officers wounded had gone up. And I think that just speaks to a number of factors, which also points to why it's so important to continue with the training and how effective the training is, because the threat coming at the officers is increasing, and for that initial response. So that program alert that you talk about, the standardization, is so key. It provides training for the officers, builds confidence in their responsibilities, the relationships between law enforcement, neighboring law enforcement, and the community. All of that comes into play in the wake of these incidents. And I thank you for bringing attention to all of that and for the work that you're doing there. I'm hoping we can get you back maybe at a later date to talk a bit more about the work being done in the Behavioral Analysis Unit regarding active shooters and diving into a little more of the psyche and the background of them, because there's so much there that I think our listeners will find incredibly valuable.
Yeah, Matt, I would highlight their work. I would say that I'm more of a novice in the behavioral analysis world, but those experts down there, they do some incredible work on many of these incidents, and obviously they're looking at the mind of the active shooter. Obviously, there isn't a physical profile of an active shooter like we've seen in the past with serial killers, what you can kind of come up with. But, for the active shooter, what we look at, or what the Behavioral Analysis Unit looks at, is specifically behaviors. Pre-incident indicators, what they have done, the actions that they take. And, unfortunately, we don't see these things except through the research after these incidents, and the information that they put out obviously are cues for school resource officers, the public, and that information probably needs to get out more out there. But what we generally speak about is troubling or concerning behaviors that an individual is exhibiting. And there are people out there who know these individuals who are observing these behaviors. And what we need them to do is to report that information, share that with law enforcement so that they can take those steps to try and mitigate those situations. But I would defer to the Behavioral Analysis Unit, because the research that they have done is incredible as far as what they have uncovered related to what we call leakage, or information that is given out by the potential shooter unknowingly, alerting people. And if you don't pick up on the cues, you don't understand that. But there are things that they are doing that, if you look at it, you can understand that there's something going on that just isn't right and needs some particular attention. And hopefully we have people who recognize that and are willing to report that, so that the appropriate investigative work can take place to try and prevent this from happening.
Well, it sounds like a great intro to a second show. Thank you, John. And I want to thank you for being a part of this, and for your team over there at the FBI that has allowed you the time to be a part of our show today. I want to thank everybody that has made this happen. So thank you. And I'd also like to thank our listeners, those who've tuned in to this episode of Lifeline and part of the Precinct 444 podcast network. Precinct 444 is proud to offer Lifeline as one of our core shows. Listeners can expect content with a holistic wellness approach focused on supporting American law enforcement. As you can tell from this programming here, it's our intent to make it safer for those that serve. And ultimately, we want to keep names off the memorial wall and to share best practices to promote overall resilience and survivability. And John, I think you've done that for us today. So again, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this.
Thank you, Matt. Have a wonderful day.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.